Okay, let's dive in. Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the sources you send us, things you find interesting or puzzling, and we really try to get to the bottom of them. Cut through the noise.
Exactly. We do the digging, connect the dots for you, pull out what's really important or sometimes just fascinating so you get the insights without, all the legwork.
And today's source,
Hmm.
well, it definitely falls into the fascinating category. Maybe wonderfully strange is even better. It's a personal account, pretty wild about inheriting property in the Caribbean, no less.
Yeah, this comes from a guy named Frank. It's his story about dealing with this legacy his father left him, and it turned into quite the secondhand adventure for him.
Frank describes his dad perfectly, I think. He says he was equal parts mystery and masonry, and that combination kind of sets the stage for this house in Bonaire, doesn't it?
It really does, because this house wasn't just an asset. It became, a whole thing, a logistical mess, but also pretty funny, maybe even a bit
Yeah,
weird.
definitely weird. So our mission for this deep dive, looking at Frank's account, is to sort of unpack this bizarre situation, what actually happened down there.
And what can we pull from it, about dealing with unexpected stuff like legacies or navigating systems that feel, well, totally alien? And maybe, just maybe, the value of having a very specific type of friend.
Exactly. Let's get into this Bonaire mystery. So it all starts with the inheritance, right? Frank's father has built this house down in Bonaire, and the way Frank describes its location is just gold.
Hmm.
He says it was somewhere between the lapping Caribbean waves and the Dutch Antillian version of municipal paperwork.
Which basically means, as Frank points out, the paperwork was kinda non-existent. Or at least not in any way you'd recognize.
Right, and that immediately tells you something about the potential headaches involved.
Oh, absolutely. International property, differing regulations, maybe less formal ways of doing things. It adds layers of complexity right from the start.
So his father passes away. The house is now part of the estate. Sounds simple enough on the surface, but then Frank hits a snag. He couldn't actually go himself.
Yeah, he sort of hints at a few reasons why. Maybe it was work schedules. Maybe he just really doesn't like sunburns.
Or he suggests maybe it was just a gut feeling, that this wasn't going to be a simple fly down, sign papers, fly back kind of deal.
A premonition of bureaucratic doom, perhaps?
Could be. So he decides he needs someone else to go,
Yeah.
someone capable, or at least available.
Which brings us to the man of the hour.
Enter Jerry, Frank's friend. Apparently they work together in consulting.
Right, and Frank gives us this little sketch of their office vibe to kind of position Jerry. He mentions another colleague, Mike the accountant.
Yeah, Mike, who only wore brown and apparently yelled at spreadsheets.
So, compared to that guy, Jerry probably seemed like a rock of stability. And importantly, he maybe had some flexibility.
Stability is definitely relative in that picture. So Frank corners Jerry, probably by the coffee machine. The source implies it was stale Keurig coffee.
Paints a picture, doesn't it?
It does, and he pitches this idea. All expenses paid trip to the Dutch Antilles to check out a house.
And Jerry's response is just perfect. He just blinks and asks, like, for fun.
And Frank, playing it cool, just says, let's go with that. I mean, the understatement is brilliant.
Totally setting him up. But Jerry agrees. And Frank makes a point of mentioning Jerry's packing. A carry-on.
And a suspiciously high number of granola bars.
And Frank flags this. He says, this becomes relevant later.
What does that tell you? Preparedness? Anxiety?
Maybe both. Or just a deep understanding of the potential pitfalls of travel. Either way, it's a nice little detail that hints Jerry might be more resourceful than he seems.
So Jerry heads off to Bonaire. His plane lands. He steps out. And his first take, Frank quotes him, like a Caribbean version of a Scooby-Doo episode.
Huh. That's evocative. You immediately get that sense of bright colors, maybe hiding something a bit off-kilter.
Exactly. He felt this chaotic calm right away. Mopeds everywhere, roosters crowing constantly, iguanas just lounging around.
Frank says Jerry described the iguanas as being in positions of authority.
Which is just fantastic. It captures that feeling when the usual rules just don't seem to apply and nature's kind of taken over in weird ways.
Sets the stage for strangeness, for sure.
And then there were the pigeons. Jerry apparently developed a theory that the local pigeons were unionized.
Unionized pigeons. Okay, so already Jerry's perception is starting to skew towards the unusual, looking for hidden structures even in the bird life.
It's that feeling of an environment operating on rules you just don't get.
And that initial kind of quirky unease, it didn't stay quirky for long. Frank says the phone calls he started getting from Jerry shifted. They got stranger.
Yeah, more than strange. They started sounding conspiratorial.
Right. This is where it moves from, this is odd, to, okay, maybe something's genuinely weird here, at least in Jerry's head.
Jerry got it into his head that he was being watched, listened to.
Not just by, like, locals being curious or parrots repeating things.
No, it was bigger,
Yeah.
more sinister. He started talking about the infrastructure.
The infrastructure. It's so vague, but sounds so ominous, doesn't it? Like some unseen system pulling strings.
Frank apparently asked him, what infrastructure? And Jerry's reply, whispered over the phone,
What was it?
the infrastructure knows.
Oh, wow. Okay, so Jerry's really feeling the pressure, the alienation. His mind is trying to make sense of the chaos by positing this shadowy force.
But credit to Jerry, despite feeling like he's in a spy movie, he pushes on. He actually finds the house.
And Frank's description makes it sound lovely. A lovely coral-colored cottage perched innocently, between cacti and hammocks. It sounds idyllic.
Looks idyllic. But then comes the kicker. Jerry discovers
The
house is occupied.
Occupied, right.
And Frank is very clear about this point in his account. These weren't renters. They weren't family friends looking after the place. Not squatters in the usual sense.
No, Jerry's report apparently delivered deadpan was just people existing.
People exist. It's such a weirdly passive yet unsettling description. Like they were just there, part of the landscape.
Frank calls it a timeshare sponsored by chaos, which feels about right.
It really does. A total breakdown of any normal understanding of property.
And just to crystallize how surreal this occupation was, Frank shares one very specific detail from Jerry's report.
Oh, this is the best part.
There was a goat.
A goat. Okay.
Inside the house, in the kitchen.
A goat
Yeah.
in the kitchen. All right. Keep going.
And according to Jerry, there was a possibility the goat was wearing a necktie.
Possibly wearing a necktie. It's the ambiguity that kills me. Was it a real tie? A rag? Did Jerry just imagine it?
We don't know, but the image. A goat in a kitchen, perhaps formally attired? It's just peak absurdity. What does that even mean?
Who knows? And Jerry, bless him, actually tried to sort things out. He attempted to communicate with the occupants.
How did that go?
About as well as you'd expect. Jerry reported back that his attempts were met with, and I quote, a combination of Dutch, papiamentu, and what I believe was interpretive dance.
Interpretive dance. As a response to, presumably, questions about trespassing.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
It's just complete communication breakdown. That, plus the goat, tells you this situation had left conventional reality far behind.
And the weirdness wasn't just external. It started affecting Jerry's connection to the outside world, too.
Right, Frank mentions this detail at Jerry's phone. At some point during all this, it started acting up.
How so?
It kept resetting itself. Specifically, the menus would randomly switch to Dutch.
Oh, come on. Even his phone was getting assimilated by the island's strangeness.
Seems like it. Another little thing chipping away at his sense of normalcy.
So you add all this up. The weird vibe, the paranoia about the infrastructure, the people just existing in the house, the goat,
The interpretive dance communication strategy?
the Dutch-speaking phone. It leads to a pretty clear picture, doesn't it?
Frank sums it up perfectly. He says they realized this wasn't just a tricky estate issue. This was the wild, wild west, but tropical.
Yeah, with salt in the air, sand in the documents.
And probably, Frank adds, a secret society of lizards orchestrating the whole thing from behind a fern.
Which, honestly, by that point, probably didn't sound that far-fetched to Jerry. It captures the feeling of total systemic collapse, replaced by chaos and, well, maybe lizards.
So eventually Jerry's reconnaissance mission ends. He flies back.
How was he?
Physically. Frank says he was about 7 pounds lighter, deathly dehydrated, looked like he'd wrestled the sun and lost.
So the all-expenses-paid trip took its toll.
You could say that, and mentally. He was apparently completely convinced he'd been unknowingly starring in some bizarre international reality TV show.
A reality show, wow.
Yeah, like one where they forgot the crucial step of getting his consent before stranding him in a surreal goat and iguana-filled situation.
That actually makes a weird kind of sense. It's one way to process an experience that defies rational explanation. It felt staged because it was so absurd.
And to top it all off, Frank says Jerry kept muttering about finding code words in the coconuts.
Code words in the coconuts. The paranoia lingered. The island itself felt encoded with secrets. Perfect.
But here's the thing. Despite the sheer madness of it all, the paranoia, the goat, the dancing, they actually did get something out of it.
Right. Frank says they got answers? Kind of. Sort of. Enough fragments, enough pieces of the puzzle gathered amidst the chaos.
to actually start figuring out the real situation with the house, to begin untangling the legacy.
So it wasn't a total wash, and Frank draws a very practical lesson from the whole experience.
Yeah, he offers some solid advice. If you ever inherit property somewhere, remote and potentially weird.
You needed Jerry.
Exactly. You need a friend like Jerry. And Frank lists the key qualifications demonstrated on this trip.
Let me guess. Packs ample granola.
Check. Is apparently unfazed by kitchen goats
Check.
and maintains, quote, an unshakable resolve even when his phone starts speaking Dutch.
Those are surprisingly useful skills when the normal rules break down. Resilience, adaptability, maybe a touch of obliviousness to just how weird things are.
It really brings it home. Frank
Mhm.
contrasts the two things neatly. Estate planning is supposed to be logical, structured, on paper.
But estate adventuring, especially in a place like Bonaire, apparently. That's comedy. Pure, unadulterated comedy.
And, Frank adds, tapping into Jerry's lingering feeling. Possibly a conspiracy.
So thinking about this whole deep dive into Frank and Jerry's Bonaire escapade, what's the takeaway for you listening?
Well, maybe it's just a reminder that sometimes the simplest things, like inheriting something, can suddenly get incredibly complex, especially when you cross borders or deal with systems that, well, that operate differently.
Yeah, legacies aren't always just about assets on a spreadsheet. Sometimes they're keys that unlock these really unpredictable human stories, adventures even.
Or maybe it's about appreciating those friends who can handle the truly bizarre, the Jerrys of the world,
Yeah.
the ones who pack granola and face down goats.
It makes you think about what resources you really need when things go off script. It's not always legal knowledge. Sometimes it's just grit and maybe a sense of humor.
And that final thought from Frank. Estate adventuring is comedy, possibly conspiracy. It's kind of provocative, isn't it?
It is. Does the absurdity, the sheer laugh-out-loud weirdness of situations like this sometimes cover up something deeper? Maybe a hint of that unseen infrastructure Jerry felt, or just the chaos inherent when systems fail.
Something to ponder, maybe,
Yeah.
about the hidden stories wrapped up in the places and possessions people leave behind. Stories that might be stranger, funnier, and maybe just a little bit more conspiratorial than we ever anticipate.